Edge room. What I was saying was no Dylan during the spring. That gave a lot of these other guys opportunities to get out there and get a lot of snaps, get a lot of reps. And dude, my surprise for pretty much the entire spring in that room, and I would say even maybe one of my top 5 or so surprises on the team, and would have been Anthony Addison. Like, I think we heard some buzz about Anthony Addison last year. It was a little bit more of like, all right, can this guy help you in a pass rush role? What would his role look like as a freshman? Didn't really play a ton, got in late in some ball games, kept his red shirt, but I think was really one of South Carolina's more improved players. Is someone that you just constantly hear about the motor, the want to get better, the want to make plays in the backfield. And, you know, I think is someone that if you're just talking about young guys who aren't true freshmen, have like been here a year or two and seem to just kind of take a jump in the pecking order, Anthony Addison is one of the people that just stands out to me in that kind of line of thinking.
Yeah, he's got that relentless type motor, you know, and when he came into South Carolina as a freshman, undersized, he's never going to be, you know, a 6'6", 260-pound defensive end. That's not what he is. But can he play, Wes, a similar role to what Brian Thomas Jr. ended up being for South Carolina, which was a guy who was a relentless pass rusher who, yeah, was maybe undersized from like a length standpoint, but was just relentless and had a motor and had an attitude. And that's maybe what Addison could be. And he could be that this season. You know, he has caused some fits in the spring. You know, you heard a lot of really good things about him to the point where, yeah, it was almost surprising, right? Just how much positive praise we heard about him living in the backfield throughout spring. So when you look at this roster, that's kind of the question, right? Who's going to be that guy or the guys opposite Dylan? And so, yeah, there's Caleb Herring's a guy to keep an eye on as a transfer. You got Julian Walker coming in who has an opportunity to factor in as a true freshman. He certainly looks the part, but Anthony Addison is one that the fans and we, even as media, probably aren't talking about quite enough at this point.
Yeah, well, we certainly weren't, I think, to start the spring. And then you just heard more and more, you know, about him as it went along. And just as a guy, as was described to us, he's the guy you see 30 yards downfield chasing down a running back to prevent a touchdown. And I think you need some guys like that, man. So what does that room look like? Caleb Herring, it sounds like, kind of had a good finish to the spring, going into the summer, has had a good start to the summer, it sounds like. And, you know, is obviously going to be a factor. The other guys, here's the way I am on the edge room, man. As long as Dylan, you know, is back 100% and can stay healthy, if Dylan is out there and those other guys are kind of working off of Dylan, like on the field opposite of Dylan, and I'm not saying he has to play every snap, but let's be honest, it is just a different group when you have Dylan Stewart on the field. So keeping him healthy, keeping him on the field in key situations is my single biggest key for that room. Like, I think you look at the interior D-line room, I feel much better about, like, just almost some interchangeable parts there. Not necessarily in skill set. Like, I think there's some different players there, but just in terms of, like, hey, if a couple of guys got injured, other guys would probably just step in there and go play close to as well. Whereas Dylan is the guy that's going to make this edge group go. And if he's out there, I think you're going to be good enough. You're going to be deep enough with those other guys. If it gets put on some of these other guys' shoulders to go, like, carry some of that load, that's where I think you do at least have a few questions about what you're able to do in terms of pass rush when you're facing really good offensive lines.
Yeah, you think back to 2024, right? You had Dylan as a freshman. You had Kyle Kennard, who ended up, you know, winning the Nagurski Award. But you also had a really good interior defensive line with depth and talent. And all those guys were good enough individually, but together, right? That's why they were so productive and were able to wreak so much havoc at times. This year, if you have a healthy Dylan, if you have, you know, a lot of people around the program think the D tackle room is the deepest on the roster. There's a good argument for that, on the surface. What's your, who's the starter opposite Dylan, and then who's kind of that second or that third and fourth guy? You can kind of see where the play of those others could elevate whoever that co-starter is, or whoever the third or fourth guy is, and vice versa. Having another quality option on one side at edge is going to help Dylan Stewart. It's going to help the interior defensive line and all those things together. So another one, Wes, because there's some younger guys, Quay Dodd, Cobby is another one to watch. We mentioned Anthony Addison, but also, George Wilson. The staff was excited about him going into last year as a potential pass rush option. Then he goes down preseason with an injury, doesn't get to play. Could he factor into this thing? He's a guy that's got collegiate experience. He's got twitch. He can factor in as a pass rusher. He's another one that, because he didn't play last year, maybe not being talked about quite as much.
Yeah, and I think especially if he's back 100%, to me, was someone – I never quite looked at him like, hey, it's going to be an every down defensive end edge guy, but there was a lot of buzz about just his pass rush juice last year. That was a guy I think they missed, being able to kind of rotate in there in situational ball. Hey, if it comes down to it, do we see South Carolina get creative? Do we see Clayton White go back into his bag of tricks and pull out the old 3-3-5, which puts – a lot of times in a 3-3-5, you're putting what are your sort of interior defensive linemen on the outside some. Like, do we see that to sort of build the depth in that room, to build, like, if you start to have guys where, you're a little bit banged up and you're looking for something different to throw at offenses, that's still in the bag of tricks, I think. They got away from that a little bit over the last couple of years because they haven't needed it, but Clayton White is someone who has proved to us time and time again he will adjust to what is needed on the field in order to give his defense the best chance, right? And I think you look at that room, man, you look at those defensive linemen, the interior guys, there are some players there that can go out on the edge and play and help you. Do you look at getting one of those guys on the field and using Dylan a little bit more in like a stand-up role too, to just maybe give him a little bit of that extra angle, I guess you would say, off the edge. Like I think there's a lot you can do there. Not we'll have a full breakdown of the D-line room itself in like a separate show, but I think that room certainly does take a little bit of pressure off of your edge guys, especially when you start talking about your dudes in there that are kind of more twitchy, kind of more pass rushy, and getting all those guys on the field at the same time in some like passing situations.
Yeah, Kelby Collins, I think is given his experience, he came out of high school, actually ranked as an edge. The schemes that he's played in at the past at Bama and Florida, he has some versatility. Definitely a D tackle, definitely in that room for South Carolina. But if you're thinking about deploying some different packages, he's someone that I think has some positional flexibility to do that. So you're right. Interesting to see, what they come up with. We've seen the past, few seasons, Clayton White has made some adjustments every offseason to how they're playing defensively up front. What will it be this year? I think is still a question. I think they'd like to major in 4 down linemen, but as you get into the season and play these games out, we'll see how that plays out.